So now, without any further ado, we're going to get right into the quality counts highlights. I'm going to start doing a little walking and talking. We've spent most of the day so far talking about the international theme of the report. It's perfectly good to do in a venue like this. But a lot of people, especially outside of education, are quality counts first and foremost because of the state of the state report part. It's the thing that people will kind of stick to the back of the report, to how we doing, how the other states doing. So that's what I'm going to focus on in most of this. We spend a lot of time talking about the theme of the report. Doing everything is really excellent. International perspective is something that we identifed before that kind of major priority for it's something that we think deserves a lot of coverage, a lot more than anything we have been able to do. So we're looking forward to the ways to kind of jumpstart really a new and new way of So if you do have a chance to look in the report, the issues we've talked about already today are the issues that are really kind of front and center in the report. International comparisons, what we know and don't know, and what we think we know but maybe really don't know about how we stack up, whether it's in education or productivity or any of these other issues. It's a really important part of how this conversation gets framed, especially in a policy and political environment. Common standards is an important piece of the report. Teaching is a big issue. Immigration and student diversity is very important. Community supports for education for individual students. And then this broader dimension of economic competitiveness. If there's one, we disagree on a lot, I think, as a field, but if there's one thing we agree on, is that if any country, if any community is going to be competitive in a 21st century economy, environment, that's a global environment. And so we are not just competing with people down the street or across the state. It is really a worldwide economy that we are part of now. And so I would really commend all the journalism in the report to you. In addition, we have a set of 4 really great commentaries in the report this year. We're fortunate actually to have 2 of our writers as part of the event this year. Pasi Sahlberg is one of them. And Margaret Spellings, who we'll hear from a little while later this afternoon also. But in addition, we have commentaries from Sir Michael Barber in England and Byeonman An of South Korea. These are all very interesting perspectives, both on what their respective countries have been doing and what they have learned themselves by looking more broadly around the world. So there's a couple buckets of research highlights in the report this year, and we'll kind of cover off on them pretty quickly in this session. We did a little bit of research this year asking states about how they use international information and resources comparisons to guide their own strategies in work. And Sterling Lloyd, my colleague, will talk about that in a little bit. And then, of course, we'll get into our annual State of the States report. This is our annual report card of states across 6 different areas of policy and performance. And this year, we've kind of heard it already. Maryland's is first place for the 4th year in a row. We're glad to have the interim superintendent of Maryland, Bernard Sadusky, right here. So congratulations. I think the schedule is very tight, but if you want to kind of buttonhole him on the way out the door, you might have a shot if you move quickly. It's always nice when leaders and other officials of state agencies can join us at these events. Because we really could not do this report without them. Quality Counts looks at state policy, it tracks it very closely, but the information we get is information that the states have generously provide to us. And so we really do appreciate over the 16 years of the report the support we've got from the states. Our hope is that it provides a useful resource to the states themselves. And one kind of final note before I turn the reins over to Sterling, common standards and kind of how states are implementing the agenda that is underway right now in the past couple of years is something we follow a lot week to week in the newspaper, day to day actually. And it's part and parcel of parts of what is in quality counts, especially as it relates to standards, assessment, and accountability. We're releasing a report today with Education First that looks at the way in which states are engaging in kind of earlier stage planning and implementation processes, around several key areas that are tied to the Common Core standards movement. And so if this is an issue that interests you, and I suspect it does for most of us, I'll encourage you to take a look at that report. You can find it on our website at www.edweek.org/RC Research Center. And it's also available from Education First website. So with that said, I will turn things over to Sterling.
Thanks, Chris. This year's Quality Counts report, like previous editions of our annual report card, features state-by-state grades on education policy and performance, along with data on more than 100 key education indicators. Each year, Quality Counts provides new grades for the states and the nation as a whole, based primarily on original survey data and analysis from the EPE Research Center. As part of the project, the Research Center analyzes data on school finance and student outcomes from a variety of sources, including the U.S. Census Bureau and the U.S. Department of Education. The Research Center also conducts an annual policy survey of state education agency representatives, examining a range of state-level programs and policies, including those related to the teaching profession, academic content standards, assessments, and school accountability. Survey data for the 6 graded categories in our analytical framework are updated on a rotating basis. To ensure that survey data are accurate and that consistent standards are applied across states, Research Center staff members carefully evaluate each survey response supplied by state education agency officials and analyze supporting documentation. We thank the state education staff members who generously contributed their time in providing information for the report. Amy Hightower will talk more about the results of the grading in a few minutes. But first, I'm going to segue from a discussion of the process for our comprehensive evaluation of education policy to highlights from the portion of our survey examining the ways states are using lessons from other nations. In addition to perennial items regarding graded policy indicators, the policy survey typically includes some questions on the report's special theme. For Quality Counts 2012, the Research Center explored the role and influence of international education data and practices in state policy here in the U.S. Now, some survey results. We asked state education agency officials whether their agency uses international education comparisons to inform reform efforts. Officials in 29 states indicated their agency uses such comparisons. In 21 states and the District of Columbia, respondents said they are not currently using education data from other nations as a policy resource. For those states indicating that they are making use of global comparisons, the logical next question is, how are you using that data? States indicating that they use international comparisons often cited a need to align student preparation with the demands of a global economy and learn from best practices in high-achieving nations. In describing specific ways in which they use data from other nations, states most frequently pointed to the role of international indicators in comparing student achievement and developing academic content standards. As educators and policymakers seek to prepare students for a competitive global economy, some U.S. states have looked to other nations to inform the development or revision of their own content standards for academic subjects. Such international comparisons are more common in mathematics and science, subjects often linked to economic competitiveness and technological innovation than in English language arts or social studies. In response to the Research Center's survey, state education agency staff members most frequently cited standards from Singapore as models for their own standards in mathematics and/or science. With that, I'll turn things over to Amy, who will walk us through this year's grade and other findings.
welcome everybody. Thank you. Okay, so as Sterling has done, this year we update 5 of our 6 standing categories for the report card. Three research related segments, research, achievement, champions, you'll find 2 other updated policies in the area of the teaching profession and standards, assessments, and accountability. The overall grade and scores take into account all 6 of these categories, including transitions and alignment policies, which we plan on updating for next year's report. So without further ado, I will get right to it and turn to our annual State of the State's review of quality counts. Overall, across all 6 graded sections of quality counts, the nation as a whole earns a C for policy and for performance. Big cat's out of the bag now that Maryland, for the 4th year in a row, has earned the highest grade, receiving a B+ overall. Congratulations to Maryland, and we'll be hearing from Governor O'Malley at the end of the Q&A session in just a few minutes. Massachusetts, New York, and Virginia are very close behind Maryland, each earning a B. This year, South Dakota had the lowest grade, a D+, and 11 other states round out the bottom tier of states with grades of C-. Among our 6 different categories, states generally tend to fare the best in the area of standards, assessments, and accountability policies, and they tend to do least well in the areas of K-12 Achievement Index. So now I'm going to share some top-level findings from our 5 updated categories this year, but you're going to find loads of additional details of the print report itself and online. So I'm going to go pretty quickly, but you can always go back to those sources for more information. I'm going to start with our 3 data and performance categories, and then I'll turn to those 2 updated policy sections. Our K-12 Achievement Index consists of 3 main elements. We've got status, or how students in each state are performing now. We have change, or improvements made in recent years, and equity, or disparities between the performance of poor and non-poor students. Of the 18 indicators in this section, 14 use data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. The index also incorporates state graduation rates and results from advanced placement tests. The nation as a whole earns a C- for K-12 achievement, which is actually 1 point higher than the last time we calculated this index just 1 year ago. Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Maryland received the only B grades awarded this year. These states have been among the nation's top performers for several years running, although their scores have become more tightly clustered over time. At the other end of the spectrum, the District of Columbia, along with 3 other states, Mississippi, West Virginia, and Louisiana, received grades of F for the K-12 achievement. The K-12 achievement section continues to be the poorest showing of any graded category in quality counts. Overall, states tend to fare better on the indicators related to improvements over time and on equity than they do on the indicators related to current performance. Only Massachusetts and New Jersey demonstrate consistently high marks across all 3 elements. First introduced in 2007, our Chance for Success Index combines information from 13 indicators that span early childhood through adulthood to provide perspective on the role of education at each stage of a person's life. One cluster of indicators captures the early childhood years, another set features participation and performance in formal K-12 settings, and a third examines adult educational attainment and workforce outcomes that are actually shaped by an individual's earlier schooling. The nation as a whole earns a C+ on the Chance for Success Index. And for the 5th year in a row, Massachusetts leads the nation with the only A, followed closely by New Jersey and New Hampshire, each earning an A-. At the other end of the spectrum, Nevada has the lowest grade of a D, along with New Mexico and Mississippi, each of which earned a D+. Scores overall on the Chance for Success Index have dropped nearly a point from last year, due in part to 1-year declines in conditions that support early schooling success, including family outcomes and parental employment. Our third data category covers school finance. Here we look at both education spending patterns and equity measures, or the way that states spread their school dollars across districts within the state. Again this year, the average state grade for school finance is a C with very tight clustering of the majority of state grades in the C- to C+ range. For the fourth year in a row, Wyoming ranks at the top, earning the highest score and one of 7 B+ grades issued to states this year. Idaho ranks last, earning a D along with 3 other states. Few states rank at either the top or the bottom of the nation for both aspects of finance that we examine, that is spending and equity. States tend to fare relatively better on the equity measures than they do on the spending indicators. The data that we use in our analysis is the most recent available from the U.S. Department of Education, which is 2009, and that's when stimulus dollars were heavily in play. It is likely that the impacts of the continuing economic downturn are not fully reflected in this year's results. For example, we see per pupil expenditures on spending continue to rise, reaching a high of nearly $10,600 per pupil in 2009. Now I'm going to turn to findings from our 2 updated policy categories this year, teaching and standards assessments and accountability. Our teaching profession framework includes 44 indicators that captures 3 categories of state policy related to accountability, incentives and allocation, and building and supporting capacity. The average state grade in this section is a C, with South Carolina and Arkansas ranking at the top and earning the only B+ grades awarded this year. 4 states in the District of Columbia earn a D- this year, the lowest grades awarded. Since 2010, when the new results were last reported, scores in this category have declined by nearly a full point, with a majority of states today now posting lower scores than they did 2 years ago. At least in part, this drop is a reflection of the economy and states' lack of ability to continue funding for some specific teacher-related policies and programs that we track. Of 10 such policies examined in the teaching profession section, we find a drop in 8. Among the hardest hit areas are those pertaining to supports for beginning teachers, those that attract teachers to work in hard-to-staff schools, and those that encourage teachers to earn national board certification. Looking across these 10 policies in our framework that directly require state dollars, 23 are funding fewer such programs in the 2011-12 school year than they did 2 years ago. Many states noted that these cuts were a direct result of state budgetary constraints. By contrast, the EPE Research Center's original pay parity index finds more encouraging news, at least about the comparability of teacher salaries. Our pay parity analysis, which was introduced 4 years ago, examines teacher salaries as compared to the salaries of workers in 16 comparable occupations within each state. We find that the national pay gap between teachers and other comparable workers has narrowed in the past several years. Today, teachers earn typically about 94 cents for every dollar earned by comparable workers. That's compared to 89 cents for every dollar earned in 2010. Teachers' salaries meet or exceed those of workers in comparable occupations in 13 states. That's 4 more states than in 2010. There are 3 other areas where we find notable changes since Quality Count's 2010's reporting that are worth a quick mention in this particular section. First, we find that 5 more states now require annual evaluations for all teachers, from 15 states in 2010 to 20 states in 2012. 4 additional states have started to require that teacher evaluations take student achievement into account, from 13 states in 2010 to 17 states today. And 5 additional states now use teacher survey data to regularly monitor and publicly report on school climate and working conditions. That's from just 4 states in 2010 to 9 states in 2012. And when you look even further back to 2008, you'll see that that trend is increasing across the board on those particular indicators. Okay, so last but certainly not least, the Standards Assessments and Accountability Policy Survey tracks data on 23 indicators. This is the longest standing policy category in our framework, and we see states faring better in this policy section than in any other. The nation earns a B in this category, the same grade as 2 years ago when new results were last reported. A dozen states receive an A, and 9 others earned an A-. Indiana and Louisiana rank at the top, with near perfect scores, while Nebraska ranks last with a graded D+. This year's results largely mirror findings from the 2010 report. States again post their strongest showing on indicators related to academic content standards. 19 receive a perfect score in this subcategory that in part looks for the establishment of course or grade-specific standards in the 4 core subject areas at every grade span. In terms of changes from the last time we updated this section 2 years ago, we find 5 additional states providing educators with benchmark assessments or item banks linked to state standards, from 27 states in 2010 to 32 today. And 6 more states are providing rewards to high-performing or improving schools, from 31 states in 2010 to 37 states today. Multiple choice questions remain the mainstay of state assessments used in every grade span by all 50 states in the District of Columbia. In fact, an analysis of trend data from quality counts shows that over time, fewer states are employing other types of assessment items, including short answer questions, extended response items, and portfolios. Since 2010, 10 states have scaled back or eliminated the use of short answer and extended response items in their assessments. Several states pointed to budget cuts as a reason for changing the format of their assessments, suggesting that states are feeling an economic impact in this area of policymaking as well. Okay, so those are the highlights of Quality Counts 2012. You will find many extra resources online at www.edweek.org/go/QC12. That is, did everybody get that? That's the main launching site for all features concerning Quality Counts 2012. Just to give a shout out to a few, you're going to find the report itself as well as the state highlights reports, which contain key customized state-specific information from the report itself, plus summative and section-by-section grades. You'll also be able to access Education Counts, which is our online state database with 16 years of state policy and performance indicators. And you'll also be able to access our popular and newly revamped grading calculator, which allows users to recalculate scores based on different grading methods of your preference. So there you have it. With that, I'm going to turn the podium over to Mark Baumster, who will lead us in questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Hi, I'm Mark Baumster. I'm the Government and Politics Editor in Education Week. And I'd like to just open the floor to questions for our panel here about some of the specifics in the reports. We do have some time for questions both from the audience here, also online before Governor O'Malley's arrival. So let me ask right there, please.
I'm coupled by one trend in sort of the findings, and one is that in your outcome and your performance assessment, the 3 states that come up high, don't show up as often in the policy as top performers. So I was wondering if you thought about that. I know there's a lag in the policies and results, but I feel like you can answer a little, think about it and let us know what you thought about it.
Well, I think actually all of those states are pretty high performers across most of the categories that we examine. Maryland is in the top 10, I think, of 5 of the 6. Its shortfall, if you will, is policies concerning standards, assessments, and accountability, where some other states have some additional policies that Maryland does not. But still, I mean, you all are ranking, I think, 23rd in that particular area, which is still quite, it's at least above average. I think in part as you mentioned, the lag is important. I think you also see in southern states, where the performance may not be as high, you see a heavier area of policy making. And it's one argument could be made that policies tend to be heavier in areas or states that could benefit from down the line, seeing those translate into higher outcome.
Linda McKay, I was interested in the salaries that were comparable for other occupations. Could you give us examples of some of the occupations?
Sure. This comes from, I think, a 2004 Is it,
We got the list of occupations from the study of the Economic Policy Institute did a few years ago. And kind of back to Posse Sadler's comment earlier in the day, this is a group of 13 professions. It's physical therapists, nurses, editors, journalists, and you can find a full listing on some of the materials online. It's typically professions or occupations with a BA to MA level of education total. It's not the high prestige MD, PhD, lawyer type points of comparison that other countries might make. And so that's where it comes from. And what we found is, things come and go a little bit. Since the last time we did the analysis and reported it, the gap between teachers and the comparable occupations has narrowed some. And that's been a combination of two factors. The teacher salaries have increased a little bit in adjusted terms in the past couple of years, and the other salaries have declined somewhat. And so things are moving apart a little bit. So the gap's narrowing. We didn't look at this directly. We don't have direct evidence. And this is kind of in 2009, 2010 is the period we're looking at here with this data. You have to wonder, kind of how the effects of the recession and kind of the tightening of public and private budgets has affected different types of occupations separately. Last year in our report, we spent a lot of time looking at stimulus and economic trends. And one of the things we found is that the money for the stimulus seems to be going where it said there's a lot of it that has been flowing into education, which would have been about the time that we're looking at these salaries. Whether that protected teacher salaries in a way that was not true of these other types of professions is an interesting question. It's very hard to track those dollars in that sort of way, but it speaks to the larger economic context that I think these professions work within.
Robert Mahaffey with the Rural School and Community Trust. You mentioned the stimulus, Christopher. Did you look at the states through the lens of the competitive grants that have been moving out of the Department of Race to the Top, investing in innovation, promised neighborhoods, the school improvement grants?
I would say, just real briefly, because I think our time is up for this session, this is something, we don't look at that directly in Education Week. The stimulus era programs certainly have been an impetus for change across a lot of the policy areas we look at. Mark is actually the expert on this particular issue because we cover these types of programs and the states day in and day out in the paper. So I'll turn it back to Mark, who I think is going to